Hey, Desi.
Hey.
Give folks a minute or two to join. Hey, Malia.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're just giving folks a minute or two to join.
I'm keeping my camera off because, like always, I'm having a little bit of computer issues, so don't want to lose connection.
Yeah, no worries. You would think after, you know, 2, 3 years of the pandemic and everyone working remotely, some of this like technological stuff would have been worked out, but
Yeah, I think it's actually the building I'm in that causes unstable connection. So I've changed my router a million times and everything, so it's not much more I can do.
hey, Kimmy.
Hey, is the link in the calendar the correct link?
Um, I don't, did you ever change it?
Is it the because it didn't take me to here. I went to the email and came from the email to here.
No. Would you mind copy and pasting it and changing it in the
Yeah,
calendar invite? Perfect example of technological snafus.
it's sent out to everyone. That should be the correct one. I was like, the one in the email is right, but why is this one not right? I don't understand what's happening.
Hey, Tanya.
Hey,
I don't know why, but it looks like the gremlins are in my computer too, and things are moving very slowly for me, but can y'all hear me good?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And Kimmy, you said that you corrected the link in the calendar invite?
Yeah, and there was a bunch of people. There was like a few that had said that they accepted or whatever. So
Yep. And it looks like folks are starting to trickle in. Hey y'all, welcome. Sorry about the link confusion there. I don't know if folks got directed somewhere else, but sorry about that. All right, well, just letting folks trickle in since as per usual, we had our first Zoom confusion. All right. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Hello and welcome to the Kentucky Food Action Network training for trainers. This is a a little different of a training than the ones that we have traditionally done. This is a skill building training. So we are going to be thinking about how do we actually create, facilitate, and then deliver trainings and trainings materials to our members and folks in our networks. So there is, I guess sort of two trainings we're going to do. There's the first one to talk about that, and then we're going to kind of practice by going through an advocacy 101 training and then doing a little debrief to see how I did. So I will be in character for the second training and facilitate it as if we did not just go over how to facilitate trainings, and then we'll talk about it. So before we get started, just wanted to introduce myself. For those that don't know me, my name is Tyler Offerman. I work with the Kentucky Equal Justice Center as our food justice organizer. We are a civil legal service organization, and we are one of the 4 organizations that helps to staff and support the Kentucky Food Action Network, which is hosting this training today. So there's a couple other staff on the call, Kimmy and Jessica, as well as members of our steering committee and the rest of our lovely general members. So welcome. And we'll go ahead and dive on in. Can everyone see that?
No.
Oh. Shared on the wrong one. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So welcome again. We're going to talk about trainings. So real quick, spot assessment. Folks can go ahead and indicate with the emoji up or down. You can come off mute and say something, or you can just put something in the chat. How comfortable are you with editing and personalizing curriculum? Any volunteers that want to say they think that they totally rock at it versus maybe they're a little nervous?
It's been a while for me, so I'm not sure how much it has changed in the years since I've done this.
So feeling practiced, but a little rusty.
Yes.
Cool. So we're all going to fall on some range of comfort here. What about actually delivering a training? So obviously these parts are all combined, but just wondering, does anyone feel really good or very uncomfortable when it actually comes to being up at the front of the room and delivering the training? Kimmy's got cool smiley face. I've seen you facilitate trainings, so I believe it. Does anyone feel uncomfortable or intimidated by delivering a training?
I think it depends on the audience, Tyler, in a way. I guess if the audience is, I don't know, policymakers versus, for example, a younger audience, I might not feel as ready to deliver a training. Depends on the audience, I think.
Yeah. Is there anyone on the call who has never delivered a training? I don't see any indications. Okay, cool. So we've all got some level of familiarity. Seems like some folks are very comfortable. Others had been, maybe feel a little less comfortable since they haven't done it in a while. And I am assuming there are certain parts of this process where we'll fall on the spectrum. Folks might feel good about research, but not great about delivering, and vice versa. So thinking about what makes a good training. So this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but just some of the key points I wanted to lift up. You know, the idea of obviously being captivating, engaging, you do not have to be a Hollywood celebrity style captivating here, but, you know, saying things, showing up in the space in a way that keeps people's attention and also engages with as many of the folks as possible. I thought about redoing this training a little bit to think about, you know, things in real life versus Zoom, right? Because a lot changed once the pandemic started and a lot of things moved to virtual. And this piece about keeping folks engaged, I think is really challenging in a digital space, but being intentional about it and thinking about it, and even when limited by circumstances, trying to be as engaging as possible. Breakouts, spitballing, filling in, the idea of really listening to what folks are saying in the space, how the content is connecting with them, and trying to build bridges, but also fill in where, you know, things might be missing, where you really want to move the conversation in a certain direction. Content has the best points to present. And this really comes down to trying to actually have the things on the screen convey the points, and then really what, or, you know, again, in virtual versus in real life, but the actual content that you should be presenting should be compelling. And you as the facilitator are really just trying to get people to engage with that content. Encouraging interactions, obviously, you know, I am doing it now by asking you to put things in the chat or respond. I mentioned bridging, you know, really, again, as a facilitator, you're creating space for others. So trying to remember and hold on to the information that your participants are providing to you, and then connecting back to it. So that one helps to facilitate the conversation by not losing important points. But two, as a facilitator, it shows respect for the person and people who are in the training, because you're listening and remembering the important things that they've been saying. Being patient, this is not something I am always great at, but, you know, the idea of whether it's with your cadence, your voice, or just with the flow of the content, being patient and not rushing are obviously go hand in hand. I've been guilty of trying to pack too much into a training and then just rushing through it. And it really makes it impossible for you to be patient and create that space. And that flows into being flexible and adapting to circumstances. Let's say you accidentally put the wrong Zoom link in the calendar invite and you lose time on the training. You got to be flexible. Or let's say the main facilitator suddenly loses their Zoom connection, and then someone else has to step in. So some of these things you can't plan for, but you can plan a training so that it's not rushed and you have space to be flexible. As far as the actual delivery itself, right? Because a lot of things that we just went over as far as not being rushed, being flexible, a lot of that is pre-planning. So that's things, a lot of that can be figured out or at least planned for before. As far as delivering the training, once you're in the space, you know, these can be very challenging to all hold at once, but, you know, trying to make an attempt to do as many of these as possible. So trying to make sure all voices are heard. Thinking about, has someone been very quiet? Should you create space, whether general or specifically ask them to contribute? But this also means, you know, managing and mitigating the people who like to talk a lot. Has anyone recently been in any meetings where there was one or two people who talked a whole lot and dominated the space? Any examples coming to mind? You don't have to share them, but just conjure up in your mind that example. I'm sure many of us have some that we can pretty easily think of. So it's a balance, and it's hard as a facilitator, but it's something you need to be mindful of. Starting with needs assessments and spot assessments as a way to just feel out the group, right? I did that when I started. And that's to, one, get people thinking, but also figure out where is your group at so you can meet them there. Using intentional questions, really, again, going back to bridging and connecting, instead of just like very general questions, maybe you can ask a question with that information. At the beginning of the training, Amalia, you said this, and then connect it back to something else. Balancing content with participation. This one also, can be really hard. We have a lot of content that we want to get out sometimes, but it has to be balanced with participation, both logistically, how much time are you allocating to things, but then just as, once the training starts and things change, you have to adapt in the moment, and you got to keep this balance. And then lastly, monitor and acknowledge input. I've mentioned this a couple times, but it's important to hold on to those things. I like to jot down notes on Post-it notes that people, like important things that people say. So that way, it's hard to hold it all in my mind, but if I have it right here next to me, then I can look to it. All right, now we're going to get into some of, I guess, what I would like to call the science of learning. So sorry, I'm just time checking myself. I'm sure we've all heard this before. Learning preferences and some combination of these 5 things. So kinesthetic, that means touching, verbal, right? Spoken word, logical and mathematical, visual and auditory. Do I have any volunteers who want to identify what they think the most difficult of these is to appeal to in a training?
I would guess the kinesthetic, especially virtually, right?
Yeah. That is a great point. Again, in person versus Zoom, but yeah, it would be very difficult for me to ask you all to do something kinesthetically right now. Anyone else have the same answer or a different answer?
I don't understand mathematical, but that has to bring to the training, or I don't know, a learning preference, I guess. Yeah, I think that would be difficult.
Yeah, as someone who got a C- in calculus, I agree. But the interesting point to be made here is that each one is difficult depending on the type of training, but just the individual, right? I mean, different people learn in different ways. And the important point I want to leave you all with is that within your training, it is not evidence-based to focus just on one, because different people not only learn in different ways, but they learn different types of activities in different ways, right? So if you were to be learning another language, it's probably, and you want to get the right accent, it's going to be hard to visually figure out how to get an accent down. Certain things just require certain types of learning, but certain people learn in different ways. So the moral of the story is, in a training, just try and do as many as possible. You might not be able to do them all, but just doing a combination of them will ensure that you're meeting as many people where they're at by providing them different ways to learn. And that's really the caveat, like different people learn in different ways, but as long as you as a facilitator try to create different avenues for learning within those 5 sort of buckets, you'll be doing the best that you can. All right, a couple just like examples again of how learning happens. So assessments are really important. You can do them before, during, or after. critical pedagogy really just thinks about learning as a two-way street. So me as the facilitator or teacher should be learning from the people I am teaching just as they are learning from me. So figuring out within a training how to, again, elicit responses and engagement from people and not just talk at them. Again, combining various forms so as to meet those various learning styles, bridging back to prior knowledge, connecting to things that have been gone over before. Scaffolding is a term that is used where it's like, so you want to meet people where they're at, but you are not where they are. So it's kind of like finding a point where you can meet them and then building scaffolding to like continue that learning. So it's not just meeting the learner where they're at, it's moving them, it's meeting them and then moving them. And then lastly, like fostering motivation. And again, as the teacher, listening to the people that are learning. All right. And I have a bunch of resources for this too, so don't feel like you need to absorb all this right now. There's some great reading I'll send along. But so we thought about the styles of learning that people have, but how does learning actually stick? How does it go from something that they've never done to something that they have fully mastered? And this framework starts at the top, ends at the bottom. So the idea that, you know, you want to, at the beginning, present information so that acquisition can happen. Slow, intentional, starting to kind of wrap our minds around what the thing is. Fluency is when there's been enough immersion in the subject for folks to be able to start to repeat it fluently without, you know, reading something. So being able to actually hold the knowledge in your mind. Maintenance is about keeping that knowledge there, thinking about activities spaced out over time that can keep the knowledge retained, and then move towards generalization. Generalization is when you have learned the subject, you have mastered it to some extent, you have done some practice or maintenance on it, and you can now generalize and connect that knowledge to other situations. The final sort of culmination of this is adaptation. You could think of this as being an expert, right? But an expert who is able to apply that knowledge to other things. So let's say, you know, you become an expert in physics. Someone who has moved to adaptation would be able to apply the concept of physics to religion or to policy or to government, right? It's about knowing the information so well that you can apply it across various forms. So this is just important to know that, like, even once you've acquired and mastered something, you have to maintain and then learn how to apply it in other situations. So as the teacher, giving you know, due respect to, you can't just like give someone information and then expect them to become an expert. So a brief word on values. People are more likely to remember, retain, and be adaptive to information that they value and connects to their values. So this is the Moral Foundations quiz. It was done, Jonathan Hart's, I'm blanking on the name of the book. I think it was Passionate Mind. And so blue are people who identify as liberal, red are people who identify as conservative, green is people who identify as independents. The words across the bottom are terms that resonate with them, that are foundational to their moral being, I guess you could say. Does anyone have any observations from this? Anything stand out to them? Are there any similarities or differences?
When it says purity, you said these are red. Oh, okay. Never
So-
mind.
So within this framework, so a purity being a core value is something that conservatives identify with a lot, liberals identify with a little, and independents identify with very little. Well, I don't want to belabor it, but the points that stand out to me are that there is no group at zero in any of these. So these values exist across political and ideological orientations. And if you're presenting information to someone, as the teacher, you know, we need to figure out how to, talking about that scaffolding, meet people where they're at, but then move them in the direction we want. You're not going to win an argument if you're arguing with people's values and saying like the core to your like moral being is wrong. It's, you know, it's just not, one, as a teacher, it's not evidence-based. Two, as a human, it's not very nice. But so knowing that we all hold these values and that the way that we convey content is going to be remembered or not remembered by if people see their values in the content is just something to be mindful of. Thinking about the frames that we use to talk about information, the words, right? I mean, I could do a 2 or 3 hour training just on this slide, but I simply wanted to add it here, just like the learning styles, to say, the more you can do to incorporate all of this diversity within your training, you're just thinking about, if you're going to talk about harm and fairness, how is that framed in a way that resonates with people who value authority and purity, or vice versa? So again, there's a lot here, but just as a teacher, thinking about where your learners are, how can we, you know, cultivate that space? All right, a couple best practices. Some of this is repetitive, but you do not have to be an expert, but do your research, right? The content should be the most motivating thing, but utilize the knowledge in the room. Oftentimes there's a lot of people with a lot of great things to share, not just opinions, but actual knowledge. So lean on that. Wait time. This one's always interesting. I don't know if you all noticed, but every time I've asked you a question, I have in my head counted to 7, because evidence says that's about enough time to make it awkward enough that someone will say something. So lean into that discomfort, create space for people to respond. Sometimes people just need time to think. But then vary the kind of questions you ask to get people to respond. Already talked about being flexible, and then depending on the format, discussion size, pair and shares, small groups, breakouts, role plays. Those are all things to be considering. Okay, so I am real quick going to, all right, stop the screen share and just ask people if they have any questions, thoughts, or reflections on any of that before we dive into the role play that we're about to do. Nothing? Folks feel good, ready to get into the role play? Oh, there's a bunch of stuff in the chat, which I could not see. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, so some pieces about how harm was pretty similar interest across the political groups. It was also interesting, Cassidy, that the conservative rank was equal across all of the values. There wasn't a sort of up or down. And yes, Ebony, conservatives do in fact have values. Not, sometimes not the same, right? Just like we saw from the graph itself. But no one was a zero. So as long as the message is right, we can connect to those values, even across what might seem some pretty large political gulfs.
But sometimes, however, Tyler, the content itself is value heavy. So so in a way, sometimes it's inevitable that you're taking a position on values, depending on the content of your training.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be clear, my goal here is to equip you all to the best of my ability to be able to do this no matter what your audience. But Amalia, bridging back to your comment from the beginning, a lot of this depends on who you're talking to, right? How you frame and convey content in a way that disregards who you're talking to is pretty much bound to fail every time. Because, if you're not meeting your listener where they're at, then you will never be able to reach them.
I completely understand and agree, but I was just thinking how it's been a strategy of certain political parties to actually really have strong, I'm not sure if it's even the value, but I guess values in terms of a lot of think tanks that over the years have been training, new, I don't know, cadres of young people to have very conservative values, precisely, even though they might not be the values that they practice. But so it's an interesting position that we tend to try to be very neutral, but that's not necessarily how all the trainings are taking place. I mean, I agree we have to, but still, it worries that not everybody plays it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and that's the thing, right? The issues that we work on, and we'll get into some of this in the training that we're going to get to in a moment, but sometimes we are in spaces training folks who agree with us on a lot of issues. Sometimes they are folks who might not agree with us at all. Sometimes it's a mix, are we training our staff? Are we training our board? Are we training a group of legislators? So or are we doing like out in the community, you get who shows up and there's no telling. I mean, when I was working on economic justice issues a couple of years ago, we did a 15 city training where we went around and talked to people about taxes. And you can imagine that if you just do a general community event, anyone can come and you say, we want to talk about taxes. Just the array of people who show up with just a mass array of opinions. And the goal of those trainings was not to, win every single person over, but the training was framed in a way to try and meet as many people where they were and then bring them in the direction that we wanted, which was wealthy people should pay their fair share and we should invest that money into public goods and public programs, right? So it really depends on who you're talking to. But again, it's just like trying to be as specific, but as broad as possible at the beginning, and then moving people in the direction you're trying to move them. Oh, all right. So we are now going to do a role play of sorts, where I do a short training on Advocacy 101, and then you all will get to debrief how I did using the concepts that we just went over. All right. Can everyone see that? Good.
Yep.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Advocacy 101 training. I appreciate you all joining me today. My name is Tyler Offerman, and I will be talking about how to engage in advocacy. So right off the bat, advocacy is a word that has a lot attached to it. But fundamentally, when we're talking about advocating for policy, we are talking about lifting up the voice of the people. And elections are won by the majority, right? You need a majority of people to elect someone into office. But those people elected by the majority also serve the minorities. So the governor serves every Kentuckian, not just those that voted for him. People who get elected in state House and Senate races, they represent every single person in their district, not just those that voted for them. Those folks are elected by us and serve us. But they do not know what we want or what we need unless they hear from us. So a democracy requires that the voice of the people be heard, but it also requires the people to use their voice. So why advocacy? Why you? Legislators, again, are elected by you. The governor is elected by you. All of these folks serve at your bequest. So the democracy requires folks vote, but again, policymakers cannot serve you unless they hear from you. They are not mind readers. So yes, getting into office is important, but engaging with those policymakers so that they really know, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about advocacy. You are passionate and you know a lot about your own experiences. And you have important information that they need to know, but they cannot know it unless they hear it from you. So real quick, we're going to stop and do a spot assessment. Who is very uncomfortable with the idea of advocacy, whether that be in the community or in the halls of DC? All right, that was a great and fruitful conversation. Now, who feels very, very comfortable? Old hat, done it a lot. I see we have a couple experienced folks in the room. Good. All right. Now, we've already talked about how legislators are elected by you, the people, and that they serve you, the people, and that they need to hear from you so as to know what their constituents want. And we have to understand here, people, that it is about policy, not about politics. Homelessness is not a partisan issue. Hunger is not a partisan issue. When we talk about the fact that thousands of people are dying in Kentucky from preventable diseases or overdoses, that is not a partisan issue. So those issues are about policy because they affect our communities. And no one knows about those issues more than you. No one is more knowledgeable about your issues. And if you can combine that knowledge with a passion and a care for yourself and for your community, then you are a formidable force because you have the knowledge, the wisdom, and now the passion to get that information to policymakers. Now, your story cannot be refuted, but when talking to policymakers, you also need to be accurate, be trustworthy, cultivate that relationship so that they view you as someone who can tell them what's going on in their district, has their finger on the pulse of the community, but also is reliable, and that they know what you tell them is the honest truth. You also have access to free media. You have a Facebook page, a Twitter account. You have spaces where you can talk about the issues and about, is your policymaker supporting you or representing you or not? And if they are, then you can give them free media. You can rally grassroots support. You can get people to knock doors for them and get them reelected, or vice versa for an opponent. And you can work in coalitions with others to make sure that the bills and priorities that they have can become enacted. And most importantly, you are willing to speak. These are all reasons why you should be an advocate. This is a quote from a poet, 17th century German poet. I really like it. All the knowledge I possess, everyone else can acquire, but my heart is all my own. Obviously, the facts, the evidence, the data is deeply important, and we need to say that. We need to say it accurately so that these folks trust us. But your heart, your story, the wisdom that you've gained through living in your shoes is all your own, and only you can tell that story. And if you don't speak, who will? Again, who understands the issues better than you? But if it's not you, another voice will be heard. This is a great picture. A lot of this training came from Sheila Schuster, the director of the Advocacy Action Network. Phenomenal person. Learned so much from them. This picture is from the 874K rally that they used to do, hope to do again. But 874,000 Kentuckians live with a physical or mental disability, visible or not. And she, for many years, along with many other advocates, would organize folks to come to Frankfurt for the 874K rally. They used to rent out the old conference center. Here's one of their events. But they would, as Sheila likes to say, gum up the works and flood the Capitol with their constituents that had physical and mental disabilities and barriers that society put in front of them, both physical and policy, and force those legislators to look their constituents in the eyes. Again, this is a minority population. These legislators were voted in by a majority group, but they are their representatives and they need to serve them. But because these folks had disabilities, you know, physically it was hard for them to go to campaign events or to do in district meetings. So folks like us who can create the space, the those bridges to get folks, directly impacted folks, whether they be us or people we work with, to the Capitol, into policymakers' rooms and offices to hear those stories. But again, we cannot tell policymakers and elected officials that they did not do what we wanted them to do unless we told them. Because once we tell them, then we can hold them accountable. There are two ways to participate in democracy: using your voice and using your vote. We can use both here, right? Elections happen every couple of years, but your voice you have every day of every week, and you can use it. I decided to keep this slide in here, even though the election was yesterday, because again, we can use our voice, we can advocate, but we also need to vote. And every election is important. The results for some races are still not known, but I think we all realize that elections have consequences. And when we vote like our life depends on it, we are often voting rightly, because it does, in fact, in many ways, whether it be Amendment 2 and the direct access to abortion rights, whether it be the policymakers who will craft the policies that fundamentally shape our communities and the existence of our neighbors. It's not really a euphemism to say it. And I think the more that we as advocates can light that fire in people, the more that we can get people engaged in voting. The largest voting bloc in Kentucky is the voters that do not vote. Almost always 50% of the voting population does not vote in Kentucky. So that's an opportunity for us to vote and to mobilize others to vote. Sheila likes to say this is her therapy slide. So as a psychologist, she would often say, if someone came into her over and over again and said the same thing was happening to them, at one point she would say, are you going to continue to be a victim of this system, or are you going to choose to change it? And I don't want to, be disrespectful or ignorant to the fact that there are serious and often insurmountable barriers put in front of people to participate in the legislative system. But those barriers can be dismantled. Those barriers can be scaled. We can help folks get past them. And we cannot and should not be victims of this situation, because whether we are there or not, they will continue to legislate. So we need to raise our voices. You need to raise your voice so that they remember it. So now that I've convinced you that advocacy is a good idea, what does it actually look like? So I won't go over this in detail, but we are currently in the interim session, thinking about Kentucky politics, the Kentucky legislature here. So we, up until December 15th, we'll have interim committee sessions. They are meeting, they are in Frankfurt, they are talking about bills. They cannot vote on bills, but they are talking. It's a great opportunity to hear what they're saying, the topics that they're thinking about. Often the same ones will come up in the General Assembly. Staying engaged during the interim session is important. Watching, contacting your legislators. Did they say something that you liked? Did they say something you didn't? They know people are watching, but they don't actually get that many emails during the interim session. So making sure they know you're one of the constituents that is watching and that you have an opinion and you're conveying it, then they're going to note that you are an engaged citizen. We don't have enough time to really dig into, again, this could be a whole training in and of itself, but there are strength in numbers. And, the more that we can do to mobilize our neighbors, our communities, our coalitions. We've talked about social media. Here's just a list, some ways to engage in the legislative process. This is not an exhaustive list, but a couple just tactics, thinking about the tactics that we will be using in our strategy to mobilize people around our issues. Remember, all politics are local. When it comes down to it, all these folks who are in the legislature have districts. They're not statewide offices. So they have a lot of local communities that they keep an eye on. And you better bet that all of the legislatures, almost all of them, read their local paper. They follow local community leaders, and they try and keep a pulse on what's going on. Because if they want to keep winning elections, they have to do that. So localizing your issues, connecting it back to your community, your voice, your neighborhood, that's going to stick with them and they're going to remember that. And it's way more important than someone like, me from Lexington or someone from a national organization coming in and telling them anything. Because in the end, we cannot vote for them. Because the most powerful statement you can make when doing policy advocacy is, I am your constituent and I vote. So if you're not their constituent, can you bring a constituent? And can you build empowerment around those folks in your community so that they also want to come? Just as powerful, or also powerful, is I work with your constituents, and my role is, and you can convey those stories, that information. So you also need to know who your policymaker is, who is your target. You want to make sure you're asking the right person to vote. If you say, I am your constituent, and you don't, send that email to your policymaker, so make sure you have your information right, and who has the power to make the decision, and then how you're going to engage with them. Stay in touch, right? This goes back to be accurate. If someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, the best thing you can say is, that is a great question. I don't know the answer, but let me take down your email. Let me take down your cell phone. Let me take down your secretary's contact info, and I will get back in touch with you. And that's a great way to take a second bite of the apple and get that follow-up meeting. And remember, this is a process. This takes time. Relationships take time, and advocacy takes time. But if we work at it, we build on that relationship, then we can get good outcomes. Word to the wise, legislating like sausage is messy. Folks that like either should watch neither being made. And it is not always a rational process. And that can be very infuriating for folks that have a logical or rational approach to the world. But the consistency, the follow-up, the relationship building, even though it's not a logical or rational process, you can still navigate it in a way where the policy and not the politics is at the core, and the important things to make sure that your community not just survives but thrives is dependent on it. And it is super messy, and it can be very nasty. And staying above all that can be difficult, but that's our job as advocates. Again, it's messy, but knowing who's in the majority, who holds the power, engaging with leadership, just like you would engage with any legislator, is important. But remember that every legislator has a vote and a voice, and making sure that they hear from you, their constituent, or their other constituents is very important. All right, I'm gonna breeze through a little bit of this just to keep us on time, but we are approaching a short session. They're going to be in Frankfurt, but they will be back in district from January 7th to February 7th, and that is a great time for you to talk to them. There's some great ways to follow up, to engage with folks. This is contact information. You can leave numbers on the LRC message line. Getting to Frankfurt is obviously great, but again, watching those recordings and sending emails and making sure they know that you're watching, it's very important. This is just here for context. This in the next slide. Are you advocating or are you lobbying? If you're concerned because of your organization, 50C3, 50C4, I don't want to get in trouble with the IRS, do know that there is a lot of advocacy in nonpartisan education that can be done across any tax status that does not count as lobbying. Here's a couple good tips for advocacy. And just to further expand on that, here are some concrete examples of something that is either advocacy or lobbying. There is a lot that we can do, and there is sometimes hesitancy to do it because there is a lack of clarity around, is it advocacy or is it lobbying? But on almost any issue, regardless of your tax status, you can do advocacy. Just reiterating some of the same information, message line, ways to get involved and identify the right legislator depending on your issue. And then lastly, just to wrap it up, remember that never forget that a small group of thoughtful people can change the world. Indeed, that's all that ever has. even if you have a small ragtag group, you've got an issue that you're passionate about, you continue to engage, to advocate. I've been told by more than one legislator that they will not vote affirmatively on any bill until they see it for the 3rd year. Because they want to see that the proponents have the follow through to continue to work on it. And that's what we need to do. We just need to prove that we have the passion, the knowledge, the solutions, and the determination to keep coming back. Because at some point they're going to realize, well, these people aren't going away, and I guess I should work with them. So that was a brief and thorough but shortened Advocacy 101 training. Hold the applause. All right, scene. All right, so that was obviously very short. But in just the couple minutes we have, what did I do or what did I not do to follow through on the points at the beginning of the training for how to effectively facilitate a training?
Participant engagement. I know you couldn't because you're doing it fast and short.
So as far as there wasn't very much participation. Desi, did you have something? Oh,
See,
let's see.
I would, oh, sorry, but um, I see what she said or what she means by not much participation, but it was so well paced. Like the information that I got, I mean, one, you made me feel bad that I didn't get up with my headache and go to vote yesterday, right? 'Cause I was feeling bad.
Sorry, Desi, you're breaking up just a little
Oh.
bit.
All right, let me put it, make sure I'm up. I said, you actually made me feel bad that I didn't get up with my head. And so even though everybody else has the food, could be the food.
I'm really hate to Desi, sorry, I really hate to cut you off, but I can't. Yeah, it's hard to understand you.
All right. Okay, well, don't worry about it then. I'll message.
Yeah, please put it in the chat if you have thoughts. Anyone else? As far as just what I did, good, bad.
I think you were great. I'm not saying you didn't.
Well, no, I don't. No,
By the way.
I'm not looking for plaudits. I mean, did I follow my own advice?
I think you did.
A few things I'll add. One was like the photos. You gave like real examples and had specific photos for like the different types of learning. There was like visual and that kind of thing. I know you didn't make all those slides, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I said, I like how you told stories along with the information as well. There were pictures and intriguing things and keeping us interested.
Is there anything that you as a trainer are going to do differently or are going to do more of because of this training or the content in it? In so much as how are you going to take this back to your work?
I think too, thinking about like how different trainings need to be, like in person versus virtual. Obviously, that's something that you talked about when you were giving this, your presentation earlier. And I think maybe that's something else like that's something that I've thought of a lot. Like, okay, you know, what's the context of the situation? You know, who am I interacting with? What's my audience? How do things need to be different? So I think too, like, especially for a virtual training like this, like what you did was really great. And I think thinking like I'm interested in thinking about the different ways to engage your audience that you brought up, like the tactile and visual and everything, especially like if you're doing an in-person training. So that's not an answer to your question, but I just thought that was an interesting thing that you brought up that made me think about it.
Yeah, no worries. Well, it is 4 o'clock. I, even though tried to pace, I think I could have followed my don't pack so much in advice. But with that being said, there is so much more we could talk about and so much more that goes into this. I would be more than happy to talk with you more about it. KFAN is ready and willing to support you in any trainings or curriculum that you're presenting to any of your members or organization. And don't hesitate to reach out if you need any support. We will send out the recording for this training and recirculate with the RSVP links for the next trainings. The next one is Food is Medicine on December 7th. So with that, everyone enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.